Due to modern-day forensic techniques, it is possible to solve murders and other crimes that are decades and even centuries old. However, some murders are so incredibly intriguing that they remain popular to this day, despite being solved long ago. Such is the case for Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born in January of 1991 as the first child of the then 23-year-old Dee Dee Blanchard and her 17-year-old husband Joseph Gustave Blanchard. Gypsy's mother was not the mother she seemed. She would go on to claim that Gypsy was born with a number of problems that would mean she would likely not survive her first few years alive. She claimed that Gypsy had suffered a heart attack, had leukemia, suffered from HIV and muscular dystrophy. However, these claims would prove to be entirely fabricated. Her father Joseph was indifferent, and when he did not leave entirely, he would often shut Gypsy and his other children away. Dee Dee dressed Gypsy in a pixie costume for Halloween, and her health concerns were first scrutinised by a woman named Kathy Strawn. Kathy realised that her clothes did not fit the same size as they did for a typical girl of her age. This left Kathy wondering how a girl who supposedly needed a tube to eat to survive was able to eat a full-size chocolate bar. However, when she confronted Dee Dee, she was assured that these things were perfectly normal and that no further action was needed. Despite this, Kathy did become suspicious and contacted social services. However, after assessing the situation, no action was taken, which would be the first of many failings. But from the age of 7 up until her late teens, Gypsy would frequently visit hospitals, sometimes as much as up to 3 times a week. During this time, Dee Dee would love to garner sympathy by speaking to the media about how she was preparing for her daughter's death. During interviews, she would often break down and would always play the victim. She was a master manipulator, and many people did indeed feel sympathetic towards her and her daughter. They didn't realise that she was in fact milking the situation for all it was worth, and that Gypsy wasn't ill at all and was being forced to take medication that would make her appear ill so as to substantiate Dee Dee's claims. Diethylstilbestrol was one of the medications that was given to Gypsy. This was a drug that was used to prevent miscarriages and was pulled from the market after a link was found between it and cancer. Gypsy was also strawberry blonde. However, Dee Dee claimed that she was losing her hair prematurely as a symptom of her disease. Therefore, she kept Gypsy's head shaved to substantiate her lies, and forced Gypsy to take medication to slow the growth of her hair. Transferable intestinal obstruction was another of the many false diagnoses given to Gypsy. To combat this, she was given a Carelink gastrostomy tube, better known as a G-tube. This tube was placed in her stomach to supply medication and nutrients, making her appear ill. Gypsy would later claim that she was not allowed access to walk, eat, or speak, all of this to maintain the illusion that she was sick. Despite all of this, there were some that still wondered about the health of Gypsy. For example, in the late 90s, a hospice worker, known only as Catherine, noticed that Gypsy gave off strange vibes. Catherine would later say, "I remember saying to my co-worker, 'This woman is doing something to this child,' but nothing was ever done." In 1999, when Gypsy was 8, she told a doctor that her mother sometimes slapped her and hit her with a belt, and even shook her so hard that her hearing would be affected. These allegations were investigated. It was found that the house in which Gypsy lived was dirty and had no furniture. However, the state was not able to remove Gypsy from the home, as they were unable to find any family member willing to take her in. Gypsy took advantage of the short periods of time where she was left alone to use the internet. It was in 2002, aged 11, that she learned the truth. Whilst on a website for kids with rare and incurable diseases, she came across a story of a girl who was lying about having cancer and leukemia. As she read on, she discovered that the symptoms were the same as she was experiencing, and upon reading this, she began to understand what was going on. And then sometime in early 2003, Gypsy began talking to a man online named Nicholas Godejohn. The two began a secret relationship, and at some point they became intimate. During their online conversation, Gypsy confided in Nicholas about how she was being forced to pretend to be ill. After she told him this, Nicholas urged her to leave home. However, there was nowhere for her to go. Gypsy had no friends due to being homeschooled by her mother, as regular school would be too much for a girl with her apparent illnesses. Her only friends were the numerous healthcare professionals who treated her. But with them, she wasn't seen as an actual person, but more of a patient. Gypsy and Nicholas came up with a plan. He would come to Springfield, and they would run away together. However, when the time came to act, Nicholas lost his nerve and could not go through with the plan. Gypsy would not give up. Instead, she came up with a new plan, a plan to kill her own mother. If she could not leave home, then her mother would have to die. Gypsy was concerned that if she did not kill her mother, she would be stuck in this life forever, and that's if she was even lucky enough to not die sooner. So she and Nicholas got to work, hatching up a plan to kill Dee Dee. The pair decided to go through with their plan on the night of the 4th of June 2003. Gypsy and Nicholas had become incredibly adept at communicating in secret. While Dee Dee believed that Gypsy was asleep, she left the room to make a phone call. This was Nicholas and Gypsy's opportunity. Nicholas used an axe to break into the home. Once inside, he made his way to Gypsy's room. She was waiting, and led him to the master bedroom where Dee Dee was asleep. He entered the room, removed the bars that were on her bed to stop her getting up, and then pulled the covers back. Dee Dee awoke, saw Nicholas standing over her with an axe, and realised what was about to happen. She tried her best to fight back, but this was to no avail. With one swing, Nicholas struck Dee Dee in the face with the axe. The two then used a knife to stab her over and over again. Gypsy would later say, "I felt a sense of relief that she was no longer there to hurt me ever again." The two got out of bed and warned Gypsy's siblings about what had happened, and told them to stay in their rooms. These siblings were 10-year-old Heather and 7-year-old Dallas. Neither of them were aware of what was going on in the house. They would go on to say that guiltiness and anxiety would consume them both in the aftermath. Their sister had been sick for as long as they could remember, and now their mother was dead. They had no idea what was going to happen to them. After this, Gypsy and Nicholas went and retrieved a bin bag and a roll of duct tape. They returned to the master bedroom. Seeing her mother's body would be too much for Gypsy. She turned and left the room. She later said, "I couldn't bear the thought of seeing my mother's body, so I left the room and let Nicholas handle things." Nicholas then proceeded to place Dee Dee's body into the bin bag and attempted to tape her body up with duct tape, presumably to make it easier to dispose of the body or to make it harder for Gypsy's siblings to recognise their mother. However, after doing this, Nicholas claimed that she was still breathing. Horrified and panicked, he grabbed the knife once more and proceeded to stab and hack at her body until she was no longer breathing, and then left in the room. After this, Nicholas told Gypsy that her mother was no longer alive, to which she replied, "Just say she is, I don't want to see." The two then left the house together. Once outside, Nicholas called the police and informed them of what he had done. The two then sat together, and when the police arrived at the scene, they were both arrested. Gypsy was 12 years old at the time, and Nicholas was 21. What's incredibly distressing is that it took the police over an hour to respond to the call, meaning the children were left alone with their mother's body for an hour after their sister and boyfriend had been arrested. When the police arrived, they knocked on the door. Little 7-year-old Dallas answered the door. Inside, Gypsy's sister Heather was in a horrific panic and was crying. She asked the police officer, "Why did Mummy have to die? It's not fair." Gypsy's siblings were greatly traumatised by what occurred, and blaming themselves didn't help. It was somewhat implied that they could have recognised the signs that something was seriously wrong in the household. 7-year-old Dallas said, "If I wouldn't have believed Mummy, she wouldn't be dead." Elaine and Mark Wood, two members of the church that the family attended, were given custody of Gypsy's siblings. Elaine would later say, "They were very closed off. They were like little rhythmic, sad robots. They were scared of their shadows." It can be said without a shadow of a doubt that the damage to these two young souls was already done. It would take years of intense therapy to even begin to reverse the damage that was done in those formative years. Upon the arrival of the police and during the arrests, some rather shocking revelations came to light. Gypsy told the investigators that she was not sick like her mother had claimed, and that her mother had made her take medicine so that she would appear ill. Even more disturbingly, it was revealed that Gypsy had been physically and emotionally abused, and that she had been forced to sleep in a crib. On the 10th of June, a hearing was held to decide what to do with Gypsy. At the time, she was described as emotionally disturbed and a danger to herself and others. She would be placed in a juvenile facility and would be required to attend a rehabilitation program. However, for Felipe Fuentes, the juvenile officer who was handling the case, none of this seemed quite appropriate. He just didn't believe that Gypsy was the type to commit such a horrific crime, especially at such an age. And so he decided that Gypsy should be placed in the foster care system, and this is exactly where she went. She was kept in a juvenile facility until a suitable home was found, where she was placed until the trial. The legal process took a while, but by March of 2006, Gypsy was charged as an adult. Now known and referred to as Gypsy Rose instead of just Gypsy, she appeared in court. During this trial, she spoke to the court and said, "I took my mother's power away. Now I'm on the street, and I don't have to do what my mother told me to do. I am sorry for what I did, and I am sorry that my sister and brother have to go through this." She went on to tell the court that she knew what she did was wrong, and that she knew better. However, she claimed that she was unable to control herself. It was at this point that she was able to apologize to her siblings and told them that she loves them. She could tell that they both still adored her and that they were truly sorry for what they had said after the killing. When addressing her sister Heather, she told her that she had done what she did to save her so that she wouldn't have to endure what she was enduring. It was at this point that she broke down and sobbed. The court heard of how she was forced to take medication unnecessarily, how she was made to sleep in a crib, and how she was forced to pretend to be ill. She also told the court about how she had been SA'd in 2002, and that after this she and her mother slept in the same bed. Gypsy's defence team claimed that she suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where hostages develop feelings for their captors. They claimed that Gypsy was suffering from this due to her being confined in her room. However, the state claimed that Gypsy was a manipulator who took advantage of a vulnerable and mentally ill woman. She was found guilty of first-degree murder shortly after reaching the age of 15 and was sentenced to a 10-year prison term, but she was given the opportunity to serve her sentence concurrently whilst she was in juvenile care until she reached the age of 17. After reaching 17, she was moved to the Greene County Jail and given the opportunity to earn a general equivalency diploma. However, shortly after arriving at the jail, Gypsy was diagnosed with depression and she was given medication to counteract this. She was also suffering from an anxiety disorder. It isn't clear if she was suffering from these conditions before she was placed behind bars. 2 years into serving her time, she was transferred to the Chillicothe Correctional Centre, where she became the youngest inmate to ever be housed there. She was released on the 13th of June 2015 and began her new life outside of prison under the name Gypsy Rose. However, she will be on parole for the rest of her life. Whilst she was in prison, she was able to finish school and was afforded the opportunity to earn a college degree. Gypsy believes that she will have to move frequently to ensure her safety, as people often wish to target those who have committed horrific and tragic crimes. The case of Gypsy Rose has to be one of the most fascinating I have ever seen. Gypsy is said to still be friends with her siblings. Her sister Heather has said that she chooses not to remember the details of what happened to their mother, but does confirm that the three are in regular contact.